And welcome to this edition of the Native News Update on this Monday, May 9th. I'm your host for today's program, Paul DeMain. And today we go to Anchorage, Alaska and talk with Lori Townsend about the recent meeting and summit having to do with the Alaskan Native Claims Settlement Act some 40 years ago. And Ada Deer made a presentation there, a member of the Menominee Nation that was terminated. Lori Townsend from Alaskan Public Radio has a few things to tell us about that summit. Welcome to the Native News Update, Lori.
Hi, Paul. Thanks for calling me up today.
All right. Tell us a little bit about this tribal summit that Alaska just had up there. Tell us what that's about, and tell us a little bit about one of the keynote presenters up there, Ada Deer. We know quite a bit about her, but we're always interested in hearing what she has to say.
Yeah, Ada Deer, of course, was Assistant Secretary for Indian Affairs when she gave the tribes here in Alaska federal recognition, 229 tribes. Ada made that possible. And she came this past weekend to talk to the tribal summit, Tribal Leaders Summit that was held here in Anchorage, organized by Mike Williams of ACIAC and others. And Ada came to talk to them because there's sort of a groundswell right now in Alaska with tribes wanting certain tenets of the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act that happened in 1971 to be repealed or amended. And there's a lot more discussion about this, it seems, all the time. So this summit brought together people to talk about what are the problems that are most concerning. One of those problems is the issue of what people call afterborns, children of Native shareholders in the corporations here, the Alaska Native corporations, that were born after December, I think it's December 14th, 1971, sometime in 1971. They are not shareholders. They can be gifted or inherit shares, but the voting rights are sometimes different. It depends on the corporation also. Some of the corporations have changed that, some have not. So that's a big issue. Go ahead.
Okay, my question would be then is for those people who are unfamiliar with that act, can you separate tribal governance or even tribal villages from the corporations? Is there a difference in all three in Alaska?
There's great differences. The corporations are for-profit entities. Then there are nonprofit arms of those corporations that run healthcare facilities and other things, training programs. And then the tribal governments themselves are another government body, agency, or entity, I should say. Part of the concern here is that there's the idea of giving the corporations government-to-government consultation status. That's very, very alarming to a lot of the tribal leaders here. They don't want that to happen. And another big concern is the prospect of corporations eventually selling off some land. Native allotments have been sold. Some of them have been sort of swindled away from people, and some of them have just been sold outright. And the fear is that in future generations, the corporation leaders could be sort of disconnected from the idea of how important the land is to tribal people, and that if it's not making money, that it might be in the corporate mindset with the mandate of profits being so forefront, so much in the forefront that they would sell off some of this land. That's something that's of great concern to current day leaders.
Are those corporations owned by 100% native stock owners from that era when the stock was given out? And can that stock be sold to non-natives?
No, it can't. That's one thing that currently, at least, it can't be sold to non-native shareholders. There, at the Tribal Leaders Summit, Ada Deer spoke a lot about the comparisons between the termination era and the Menominee tribe being terminated and losing their rights as tribal people, and that their land immediately became subject to taxation, which of course created a whole new host of problems for them. And the fact that people were fired from their tribal logging and forestry operation. They had to leave the reservation area and go to Milwaukee and other places to get work. It broke up families. And she talked about how devastating it was and how ANLCSA has been having a lot of similar effects on Native families here. And so she made a lot of comparisons between the two, saying that this effort is sort of like a termination effort. It did terminate hunting and fishing rights. It extinguished those. And the afterborn issue, the shareholder issue, was also very concerning to her. But she really encouraged people and told the tribal leaders and people attending there, it was a packed house listening to her, and she said, we did it, and you can too. You just have to decide that you're going to organize and go after these troubling aspects of the Claims Settlement Act. Now, one of the things that's happening right now is there's a little piece of legislation. The last time I looked, I'm not sure if it's still there, but when I checked on it about a week ago, it was in the U.S. House Natural Resources Committee, and it would seek to amend the Indian Reorganization Act of, I think it was 1924. I might be incorrect about that year. It seeks to amend that so that there is a paragraph that says, the Secretary of Interior has the authority to take land into trust except in Alaska. So it's language very specific to Alaska and would make sure that Alaska could not take land into trust anymore. And that's greatly disturbing to many of the tribal leaders who are at the summit. They're aware of this, and they're very concerned about it.
Yeah. Just in case we're wrong with the date, I'm thinking 1924 was the Indian Citizenship Act, and then 1934 was the Indian Reorganization Act, something like that in sequence.
It was off by 10 years.
Just in case. Well, there's all kinds of acts. There's, there's restoration, there's relocation, there's termination. There's been all these sequence of things that have come and gone, and indeed placed Native governments on this odd setting where they're trying to separate social family from legal, political identities, from the business end of things. And that's what you got up there. You've got some experience in termination and restoration going on, because the Menominees, while they were terminated, their hunting and fishing rights were not terminated at that time. So perhaps they learned from that legislative act that when they went into Alaska, they not only formed these corporations, but they did terminate the hunting and fishing rights. And now you have village governments and you have corporations, and it's very difficult for people to make that transition from bush people to people who have voting stock in a corporate capitalistic entity that acts like an individual according to federal law.
Well, I know that there's been a lot of panel discussions recently called ANLCSA at 40. The Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act is 40 years old. And so there have been panel discussions. Nellie Moore has led a number of those, bringing together tribal leaders and government officials who were involved at the time in passing this legislation, and the huge battles about it both in Congress and in the state. And the concerns that were voiced at the panel discussions echo a lot of what we're hearing now, that people were troubled, but they were so little prepared for what they had to deal with, as far as suddenly here are people from out of the state helping or trying to help push this act through. And I know that one of the Native leaders, Mayor Edward Itta from the North Slope Borough, said that they couldn't even comprehend what $1 million meant. He said, I was working on the North Slope as a roustabout, and he said, I was making $5 something an hour and just thought I was incredibly wealthy. And so he said, when they talked in terms of $1 million, we had no way of really wrapping our heads around what that meant, much less several $1 million. So it was, right. He said it was very difficult for them to understand what we were doing and what it would mean in the future.
And isn't that some kind of a reflection of even some of these other land deals where all of a sudden you realize that while you have millions of dollars, when you break it up into acreage and things like that, you're finding out that you're selling lakefront for 13 cents an acre. I'm sure it's more than Alaska, but down in Wisconsin and other places, there was these settlements anywhere from 9 to 13 cents an acre historically a long time ago. Some of that could have been remedied in regards to the money allocated, but yeah, you're 40 years later, you're trying to figure this whole thing out. And what about the children that aren't stockholders in property that would have rightly been theirs as heirs? What's the next step in this whole thing, or where's it going?
Well, I just wanted to say that it reminded me of when Ada Deer was speaking. She talked about how there had been a lawsuit with the Menominee, and I don't know if it was the state or one of the counties, over some blowdown timber that they wanted to harvest. And there was a big fight about it with some other local sawmills. I'm not real clear about the whole issue, but what came out of it was an $8 million settlement that was for the Menominee tribal people. They said, we want this in a per capita payment. And she said that ended up being about $15,000 a piece. But a senator at the time withheld that money and said, well, you can get your money if you agree to termination.
Yeah, right.
And she said people were poor. And at first they agreed to it, and then they realized, hey, wait a minute, this isn't a great idea, and they voted again and said no, but the senator, just ignored that and went with that first vote. And it reminded me of what Mayor Itta had been talking about trying to comprehend what it means to deal with $1 million, much less many more than that. And so it wasn't that people weren't smart enough to deal with these negotiations. It was just a whole different way of looking at the world and trying to figure out how will this work in the future for us. And now people are far enough down the road that they can see the ripple effect and what has happened because of some of these, and they want them changed.
Yeah. More meetings coming up. Where can we go for any of these updated stories? You got about a half a minute.
There will be an update this evening on the Tribal Summit Act. I'm writing it right now, and so that will be on the Alaska Public Radio Network website, aprn.org, later this evening.
Thanks for joining with us again, Lori. We'll keep on top of this and see where it goes.
Thanks, Paul.
And that is the latest roundup of news from Indian Country on this edition of the Native News Update. I want to thank you for joining with us and come back again soon. Miigwech.